Okay, so far this morning we've touched a little bit on the history of situational leadership, and I mentioned to you in the objectives that we were going to cover the model fairly quickly, because the majority of what we're going to cover over the next day and a bit is going to be looking at the core concepts behind the model and putting some of those into practice. So we can practice those in depth, so you've got some real tangible things to go away with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the model in terms of plot everything on the model that I want you to see at the moment, and you're going to replicate what I'm doing in your workbooks. So on page 4, you will see that there is this exact model that you see here, and I'd like you to create the aspects of the model as I walk through it with you. And I will give some examples, however the finer details will come a little bit later on. Okay, so influence is divided into 2 separate behaviours, one being task and the other being relationship. So at the bottom of our square here, or our quadrants here, I'd like you to write the word task. Okay? When we talk about task, this is to the extent that the leader is engaging in defining roles, setting the parameters, providing the detail. So to give an example, high level of task behaviour is all about how much information that person needs to perform a particular task. So how much detail do they need? And I'll give you an example of that in just a moment. So that is task behaviour. Okay. So that's on our horizontal. On our vertical axis here is the other aspect, the other behaviour, which is relationship. Behaviour. Okay. And when we talk about relationship behaviour, we're talking about the extent that the leader is engaging in two-way communication. Okay, so that's the level of interaction, active listening, the flexibility factor. So that's what we mean by relationship behaviour. And in terms of the values we're going to add here, there's not percentages, but we're going to have the beginning of our axis here, low to high, and low to high. And this will indicate how much of each behaviour we are adding in our styles, which we're going to come to shortly. So if we look at quadrant 1, this is our first quadrant, we can see here, I'm going to put the first one in for you, and we'll work our way around the rest. So in this particular quadrant, we are looking at high task and low relationship. Okay, we'll come to that because we're high task over here, and in terms of our relationship, okay, it's fairly low. All right. Now, when we talk about low relationship or low task behaviour, we're not talking about none at all. We're just talking that in that specific task, the amount of either relationship or task behaviour would be reduced, and there would be good reason for that. So when we get to our second quadrant, okay, we're still high task behaviour, but where are we with our relationship? So what do you think the other part of this little equation is here?
So we're high relationship.
We're high relationship, yeah. All right. So moving over into our quadrant number 3, where are we in terms of relationship? So if we're plotting here,
we're high relationship.
Yeah. So we're high relationship, and what about our task?
We move to low on the task.
Yeah. Okay. So high relationship. Okay, and the task is not high anymore, hence the reason why we're putting low task. All right. Okay, so quadrant number 4, what does that look like?
Low on both.
Yeah. So low task and low relationship. Now, for the benefit of what we will go on and develop, I'd like you to plot S1, S2, S3, and S4, as you see here in each of your 4 quadrants.
Okay.
And these will later represent the different styles in which a leader could adapt when working with the follower in a given task. But more information on that will come a little bit later. Okay, so now I want to add a little bit more of a description as to what does high task and low relationship look like. So I want to ask you to think about, in what situation can you imagine that you may have had or that could happen in the future where you need to give a member of staff or somebody a high level of detail? Why would you need to give someone a high level of task information?
If it was a task that was brand new to them, or if that task had changed greatly and they hadn't performed before.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. So, a task that they've never done before, or a task that is new to them, or something that has changed. I guess when I think about what you've just said then, a new member of staff jumps into my mind. You know, somebody who perhaps is new to the organisation. As leaders here, many of us have new members of staff frequently, and so it's very appropriate to be giving that individual a high level of task behaviour from the leader's perspective, because they don't have any information to go on. So if we're going to put that into a phrase, and again I'll explain a bit more and give you an example in a short time, this is, from the leader's perspective, I talk because by nature, by you giving a lot of detail, because it's required, you are doing the talking to the follower. But you're also making the decision. This is where the I decide comes in. Okay, so I talk, I decide. As the leader, I'm giving you a lot of information because it's required for that specific task. One of the things we'll reference quite a lot as we go through the model and beyond is that this is very task specific. This is not about the person, but this is about the specific task itself. Okay, so given that in a high level of task, because it's required, low relationship, as in you need to provide them with the detail, okay, but you need to make that decision for them with whatever task it is, because they don't have anything to go on. What you will find as we go through the model, that this is a potential progression. It goes in an anti-clockwise motion. So let's just assume our new member of staff has learnt that specific task through a lot of direction and the decisions been made by the leader. Okay, so we've been doing that task for a little bit longer. Okay, so there's now a little bit more awareness of what they need to do. So when we look at the phraseology here, how might that change in our second quadrant? It's still high task. Okay, but the follower, or the person that you are leading, or attempting to influence, has got a little bit more information now. So when we talk about relationship, low to high depicts the amount of engagement or the amount of two-way conversation. Do you think it would still just be I talk from the leader's perspective?
No, not if there's more two-way communication.
Okay. So if there's a two-way communication now happening, what word could we take away the I? What could we replace that with? So we've still got the talk.
Yeah.
Rather than I talk, what's happening?
We talk.
Yeah, perfect. So now that there is a two-way conversation, because that individual now has a little bit more information. So they have that ability to be able to, or that knowledge to pull on to have that conversation. But who do you think still might be making, who do you think would be making the decision at this time?
I would say still the leader.
Yes. So it's still, the leader is still making the decision, okay? So this is where the we talk, but I decide as the leader. And one of the things that I want to highlight at this point is that when we look at these two quadrants, these are leader-driven. When we're talking about different styles later on, when we talk about S1 and S2, this is very much driven by the leader. Or not very much, it's very driven by the leader. No, it is driven by the leader. I'll get that right in a minute. Okay, so done the task for a while. there's two-way conversation, communication. Now we're going to cross the kind of pivotal point here in the middle of our model, where we're going from lead-driven to now stepping into follower-driven. And this is going on the identification that the individual skills, their willingness, their ability, they're more competent at executing that specific task. So in terms of the conversation, it's still high relationship. So it's still, yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Still high relationship. So what kind of communication was happening now? Has it changed?
No, it's still likely to be we talk.
Yeah, so there's still a two-way communication. Yeah. The communication might have changed from where we are in our second quadrant here, still because we're leader-driven, the leader is still going to probably providing most of the amount of direction, but there will be more clarification, more understanding on the follower's part. But of course, we're going from now, they're getting more confident and confident, so there is still a two-way conversation. So this is still we talk. But who's making the decision, do you think?
Well, for it to be different from the top right, it's got to be the follower decides.
Yeah. So we're now, you decide. So if we go on the premise here that we say this is leader-driven and this is follower-driven, we're still having a conversation, still high relationship, but now the follower is able to make a decision. And they're making the decision based on the fact that you're confident that they've got what they need to have to make that decision. It has to be appropriate for the task. Okay, quadrant number 4 is ideally ultimately where you'd like to get somebody in a particular task. And they're going to be making that decision themselves. The reason why we don't start with, we are in low relationship, so it doesn't mean there's no relationship at all, but what it means is that person they've been making the decision here, so as I said, the conversations are going to be fairly minimal, maybe clarification. But why would a leader be happy for somebody to make a decision by themselves?
Because they feel that they're now able, they're competent.
Yeah. So someone's able and competent. So ultimately, what is that saying? If you're able and you're confident, and go off and you make that decision yourself, what must there be between the leader and the follower? Any particular word that springs to mind?
Got your level of trust.
Absolutely. So you decide, because guess what? I trust you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah? I want to add a couple more words to our axes here, which may help in kind of underpinning the difference between task and relationship. So when we talk about task behaviour, this is very much about the directiveness that the leader is applying. So how much directive support are they giving? When we talk about relationship, I want you to also add the word support, or supportive. So it's about the amount of supportive behaviour that's being employed at that time, relevant for that task. Remember, low doesn't mean none. What it means is that there is less of it because that's what's appropriate for the situation. One of the things I want to reference in S1 is that this is not, when I say I talk, I decide, from a leader's perspective, it's not meant to be confrontational. It's what simply is required for that specific situation. And I want to give you an example myself of something that we can apply just to reiterate the 4 quadrants here. How many of you here drive a car? Yeah, okay, great. So most of you drive a car. And I want to take a very specific task, which is parallel parking. So if you think about the kind of situation that's occurring between the driving instructor and the learner driver the first time they're introduced to parallel parking. The first time they're introduced to that particular task, and you notice I haven't picked driving in general. I haven't picked driving as a general task. Why? Because it's not specific enough. Okay? So in driving, there are hundreds of different skills that need to be employed. You can say somebody's no good at driving, but it might actually be one specific task that they're no good at, opposed to driving as a whole. So we're picking one particular task. So the driving instructor is giving information to the learner about how to parallel park. They've never done it before, they've seen it in a book maybe, that's probably about the limit of what knowledge they have. So the driving instructor is, I talk, I decide, I'm telling you what you need to do because I'm making a decision for you. That's appropriate for that task. A few weeks down the line, and that person's practiced it a few times, in terms of their development, and what you'll notice is that this is following a path of development, hopefully, in that specific task, is that now that person's practiced it, we can have a bit more of a two-way conversation between the learner driver and the instructor, because now I understand a little bit more about how this parallel parking works. But ultimately, my driving instructor has to get me through that test. So he or she is still making the decision on the process I have to follow in order to achieve that to a required standard. Okay? Because there's probably hundreds of different ways of parallel parking. But as there are hundreds of different ways of performing certain tasks in business, doesn't mean it's the right way. So again, the leader is still providing that direction and making that decision. Are we all with me? Yeah? Okay. So then we get to quadrant number 3. So you tell me. My parallel parking, it's come on a little bit. The driving instructor and I are still talking, but I'm now making the decision. Where would that be in the equation of me learning this parallel parking malarkey?
I think you'd be quite a way down the line, and as a driving instructor, I would believe that you had the knowledge, maybe developed some skill, and now you've got some experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're making an assessment based on things that and we're going to pick up on this later on because you touched on a couple of points, which is you've physically seen my level of competence and what I can do. So you're allowing me to make that decision because you're taking off the reins a little bit as the driving instructor. What stage is this? You decide I trust you. Where's the driving instructor at that point and the connection between the driver and the instructor?
I would hope this would be close to the actual test with regard to that task.
Yeah, you could say that is either the test, or you could even say after the test, when you're free to kind of go, hopefully you passed your test. That would be a good start. So that if you take it for the exam, you're making the decisions because your driving instructor trusts you. He or she knows that you have the required skill level, and the conversation is going to be minimal because you've got to now go solo, and they're happy that you can do that. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it suggests that the 4 leadership approaches that we've kind of talked about here, or the 4 approaches that can be taken, are all a combination of different task and relationship behaviour, and they go, as I said, depending on the situation. One last thing that I want to add to the model before we look at the last little bit at the bottom here, and that is what is called the bell curve. You can see it on the screen over here, and it's on the front of your books. And I'm going to ask you just to add the bell curve to your model. Okay? Now, what this bell curve illustrates is the developmental process that somebody could go through if we were going through the task, for one specific task, if we were going through each stage. Okay, now that's not to say, and again we'll cover this later on, that's not to say that someone will always start in S1. They may well start in S2, and there's lots of movement and there's lots of areas within this that we're going to cover, but for the moment I want you to just put a couple of arrowheads so that what it's reminding you is that it goes in anti-clockwise motion. This is a 2-dimensional chart, this doesn't necessarily one goes up, one goes down. Okay, any questions?
No.
No? Okay. The very last bit we're going to add is boxes at the bottom, which you've got in your books. And this refers to the performance readiness. Again, this is probably one of the most crucial steps which we're going to cover, which is step 2 of our course. So I'm just going to ask you to write performance readiness. And this is very much a linear scale. When we're assessing somebody's performance readiness, their combination of ability and willingness to do a task is going to be in one of 4 places. And again, we can reference this back to the parallel parking. So we've got low, low to moderate, moderate to high, and high. So we know that when I was talking about my first experience of parallel parking with my driving instructor on day 1, where would I have been on the performance readiness scale?
Definitely no.
Yes. I might have thought I was here,
Yeah.
but the a successful identification from my driving instructor would have known that I was here. Okay. And again, we're going to cover a lot about performance readiness, where people are and where they can move to. Just before we finish on the model, I want to just add that no one style is good or bad. Okay, people are in a quadrant in accordance with where they are for that specific task. The only time there could be a problem is if somebody started in high task, low relationship and nothing ever changed. Okay, the end.
Thank you. Well done, Natalie.